I think in our culture we have a big disconnect, and we focus too much on reciprocity. Often reciprocity is linear, where we think, okay, if I do this, I get this, right? And in Austin and the way I do business now, I don't think like that. I don't want a direct return. I like to act and then see how things circle back. I always try to think in loops. How am I closing loops? The more often something comes back to me, the more growth, the more success we have. And it might not always be clear, but you look back and you're like, oh, okay. Like that's why I did that. Or that's, why so-and-so was introduced into my life. Or that's why we met. Like, we're just closing loops all the time.
Hello, my dear friends and listeners. Thanks for coming back for another episode. You're listening to Be On Air, and I'm your host, Kaylee Marks. We're here yet again, another episode, another week. This one is pretty awesome. I went to Eazy's listening studio. It's a podcast stage and recording studio here in Austin, led by Evan Duvall, who is our guest today. And Evan served in the Navy. He's a fitness trainer, warrior, and incredible podcast host and community mobilizer. And he has been creating these live podcasting events here in Austin for some time now, and just totally crushing it here in building community, building culture, and really taking podcasting to a new place. And so I'm really excited for you all to hear today's conversation. We get into Evan's journey and how he came up with this idea, how it's been going. We talk about podcasting. We talk about his time trying to figure out what he would do coming out of the Navy and how he came to podcasting. And I think if you're interested in sharing your message and in community building, that this episode will serve you. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Hello, Evan Duvall. First of all, thank you so much for having me in your studio. We're here at Eazy's listening room, but welcome to Be On Air. It's great to have you on the show, man.
Man, Kaylee, thank you so much for the offer. And it's great to be on the other side of the microphone as a podcaster and other side of the interview.
Yeah, it's a trip, right? Like, as hosts, we're so often listening to other people's stories. We're always, figuring out how to promote the show and get new guests and stuff. And it's really cool to have that flipped and get to share your experience. And what you have been doing with Eazy Does It Podcast and Eazy's listening room is really unique. Haven't seen anything else like it. And especially now in pandemic times, we need more reasons to come together. We need more venues for that. And I think what you've done here is really extraordinary. So again, thank you for having me here and for being on the show. And I thought we could start. Maybe you could just describe for those listening. So if you are listening, you can watch this on YouTube. I'll put the video up there and you can see where we are because it's absolutely beautiful. But for those listening, could you describe where we are and what the vibe is here?
Yeah, man. We're here at Native Hostel here in Austin, Texas. After, a journey, I ran into Antonio, the owner here. And after doing podcasting in the cafe here for a couple months, there was actually a space that was available that was soundproofed. And it was a funny story. I was doing a podcast here every Saturday live. And on the last Saturday, it was actually my 18th week of doing a live event every week. And so I was just exhausted.
Wow.
And I was actually flying out to California just for a quick break to go surf and hang out with my friend Pat. And Antonio did a walkthrough with me through this room. And he was like, well, I think we're going to build a podcast studio back here. And I was like, man, that'll be awesome. That'll be a great way for y'all to showcase the artists that are coming through this building and be a great asset to Native Hostel. And it just went right over my head that I could be involved in any capacity.
You didn't even think about that.
I didn't want to at the time. At that moment, I was focused on doing my last event and getting out of here for a week. And I went home that night and I started thinking about it a little more. I was like, well, I've been podcasting in the building for 2 months. If anybody should be a part of that, it's me. And I really liked it here. I wasn't quite ready to just move on and to go to the next venue. So I came up here the next day, and Antonio was sitting at the bar working, and I was like, hey, man, I'd love to talk about that podcast studio, and I would like to build it. And he was like, well, let's get out of here. Let's go grab a beer and kind of talk about what that would look like. So we did, and I kind of described to him my idea of what I would do with now a controlled environment. And went to California for 7 days, came back on the 8th, and came into an empty and soundproofed room, and I was honestly really intimidated now that I had the space. And I call it the void. There's a certain presence to this soundproofing and the weight of this room that you walk in and you feel it. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I'd found a gym and really just started kind of bringing in the equipment I had and furniture and stealing a bunch of stuff from around Native and hitting up friends that were artists and, just asking for some community involvement. And so what we have now is Eazy's listening room and studio. It's a progression of a lot of different decisions and calculated risks. But really, what I'm trying to encapsulate here now is to showcase all the different industries and individuals and artists and creatives that Austin has to offer. And, what we're experiencing now is really special, and I believe in it with all my heart.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically like a combination between this speakeasy, mystical, magic carpet ride, comfy, cozy living room, right? And, the really high ceilings, super quiet. We're right next to one of the biggest highways, interstate highways, right? And it's completely quiet in here. It's interesting what you said about the void. It's a space for listening. It's a space for having dialogue and bringing community in. So, for the listeners, I first met you, Evan, at a creative community gathering at Photo House here in Austin, and my mentor, Dr. Marlene Carson, who is a survivor of human trafficking and an extraordinary woman. You interviewed her on the show.
Beautiful.
That was an amazing kind of mix of things. That was the first time I saw what you do. And so to give the audience a picture, you have an awesome podcast van.
Yep.
And you have your awesome team, and you have all this gear, and you were basically packing into different venues all over the place, right? And doing live podcasting. And that's really one of the things that caught my eye, my ear, was like, whoa, I've never seen this format before. And so I'm wondering if maybe you could take the listeners and me through your journey with coming up with that idea. How did you get into podcasting? And then how did you even come across this idea of like live podcasting with headphones and whatnot?
Yeah, man. It starts about, 4 years ago. I was in the Navy at the time. I was stationed in Florida, and without getting too deep into that journey, I was coming out of a very kind of rocky place in my life. And at the time, I had no interest in using social media. I wasn't using social media because I took to books and podcasts more so because I could see the growth that it helped me develop perspective. And the second that I would, get on social media or get on my phone, I started taking more things for granted, especially real things. And so at the time, I wasn't using social media. And then one day I was on a trail run, and I really got this rush and wave of motivation to get back on social media because it clicked that, the majority of my friends, that's where their attention was. And if I wanted to access them, while they're sitting in my car and I'm driving and they're just on their phones or we're at dinner, it became obvious that I had to go there to access them. And so what I started doing was sharing my own personal journal entries. No filter on it. I wasn't rewriting it. And I would just post it with, a shitty picture off my phone and make it black and white so it was less shitty. And it was the most vulnerable action that I had taken that, far in my life, as far as just being transparent with what I was going through. And I got a pretty unique response for how I was utilizing the platform. And everything changed when I had this 29-year-old girl reach out, and she had terminal cancer. And she messaged me, and I didn't know her. She didn't know me. Somehow she found my page, and she sent me a message saying that although she had terminal cancer, that I had shifted her perspective and that she was going to fight and try to be more optimistic.
Do you remember what it was that you think that maybe sparked that in her? What post? Or
man, I don't know. I was just trying to share from the heart, and that response made me realize that you could engage on that platform in a real capacity, and just because we've invented something doesn't mean that we're utilizing it the right way, and there's always room to innovate and create on platforms and bring it back to reality. So that was just kind of the origin of the journey. As I went through my military career, I started my first podcast. It was called Raw Perception Project. Please don't go back and listen to it. It was just a snowball microphone on my desk, and I would just rant, but I learned how to use platforms like Podbean and just the progression of it. And once I had an idea of how to upload a podcast, I just stopped. And then I continued sharing on social media. And then as I was about to transition out of the military after 6.5 years, I really started to make notes and articulate my vision of rebranding a platform and doing everything that I learned just through oversharing and being vulnerable and, just doing it the wrong way. I learned everything the hard way, but I learned quickly. And so I rebranded into Eazy Does It. And this is now just an encapsulation of everything I've learned over the years through sharing. I would much rather put something out there and, it be, less than perfect in order to just take advantage of momentum and
done is better than good, right?
Yeah, be in a constant state of action, and that keeps me moving forward. So yeah, the progression of the podcast itself, when I came home, I'd processed out of the military August 2020, so middle of the pandemic. At that time, I'd been quarantined multiple times trying to get back to the U.S. so I could get out of the Navy. And those quarantines were real. We're talking solitary confinement in military barracks to where you had no human contact.
Wow.
So I utilized that time to write my business plan and come up with a plan of exactly what I would do when I got home, which included the podcast, and it also included me putting out events here in Austin, Texas, and buying my Ford Transit van. And there was a lot of plans. But when I got home and I got to work, everything just started to become more and more clear because I wasn't planning, I was doing. And the more awareness I brought to what was happening and what was transgressing in Austin, Texas at that time, just more and more clarity came. So I started doing boot camps out at Zilker Park, which is our metropolitan park. And I was bringing the fitness aspect to it, but I was also utilizing live DJs and bringing artists out to live paint. I was featuring local vendors, and this was during the pandemic, so I was just waiting for city officials to run me off and tell me, like, you can't do this. And we did 6 weeks in a row, and it grew from 10 close friends and family to 20, 30, 40. We got up to about 100 people at the boot camp. And I would always do an hour-long workout and then an hour after of live music, and local breweries got involved. And it started to attract people that had really just moved here to Austin in the middle of the pandemic as well. And they didn't know what Austin had to offer because everything was closed. And so it really became a way for people to network and meet friends. And, one thing led to the next. And I really liked doing events. But then I got hired over at On It Gym here in Austin. I was a personal trainer over there.
And at this point, the podcast, you weren't podcasting.
I wasn't
currently.
Podcasting. No, I was just doing public speaking through fitness.
And building a community, building
community. Yeah, networking was my main priority coming home because I knew that that's what Austin is. It's definitely a relationship-based town, and if you do that well, you'll succeed here. So I went over to On It Gym, became a personal trainer over there. It was dream come true at that time.
Did you get to meet Aubrey while working?
Yeah,
there? Nice.
I met Aubrey, and there's a lot of good people over there.
That's awesome.
And so I became a successful trainer, and through the winter when the parks were closed and everybody was looking to me to bring the boot camp back in the springtime. But as I kind of dove more and more into the fitness world, I realized that fitness industry wasn't exactly what I wanted to pursue. I wanted to bring it back to relationships and just listening and speaking. And I also realized with the boot camps that there was a big factor of intimidation, of people not coming out because they were afraid to go through a hard workout or be vulnerable. So I started thinking about how I could kind of restructure the events. And that's when I decided I was going to start throwing parties. And a little less intimidating to do your makeup.
Let's get rid of the workout. Let's just have a party.
We'll get rid of the workout. And instead of the workout, I still wanted to orientate the event to where the initial hour helps people open up. With fitness, you get a sweat, you get endorphins going. That second hour where there was, beers and CBD and live music, everybody just kind of just swarmed to each other. So I started thinking about how I could create that same effect. And it was a perfect opportunity to incorporate a live podcast. And
how did that idea come to your mind? I don't think everyone would just be like, oh, time to do a live podcast, because a lot of times people think you need to be in a quiet studio like this, right?
Well, everything was shut down at the time. This was in the middle of the pandemic. And so I think through that phase, through those quarantines, through that solitude and isolation, a lot of people had a lot more awareness of themselves and their energy. And for me, I wanted to be more careful about how I stepped back into my life. I had the time, I had the solitude, I had the independence in the military while I was stationed in Japan, to be mindful of how I spent my time and to always be growing. And I knew coming home that I could just jump right back in with same old friends, running the same bars, and just kind of exhaust myself in that capacity. But thankfully, a lot of us took a step outside of that rat race, and we saw that we weren't necessarily just ready to jump back into surface level interactions or wasted energy. And so I was thinking of the things that I wanted to seek out, how I wanted to spend my weekends. What kind of events did I want to spend my time at? And I realized that they didn't really exist. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to create it. And that was, it's been a journey. It hasn't stopped yet. And
when was that exactly
That was March.
Of this year?
Yeah. So wow. March of this year, where nobody was doing events. So going back to the van, episodes 1 through 4 of my podcast were filmed in my transit van. So I put in 2 captain's chairs that would swivel around, and I did a full custom build out to where we could run off just basic equipment, Zoom H6 and minimal mics and tripods, and everything was removable. And I knew eventually I'd wanted to go to a live concept, but I wasn't really sure how. So the most attractive thing to me was having a studio on wheels that I could possibly travel the country in, and still will, but also, going to the guests and fitting in on their schedule and not making it, not sending them a schedule where they got to fit in on my time. It's like, no, I just wanted to, I did a couple podcasts where I was parked outside the gym or their house or whatever, and just made it easy for them. And that quickly progressed. So I filmed and recorded the first 4 episodes, and then I decided to do a release party where we'd feature our first live podcast. So I started knocking on doors all around Austin, Texas, coffee shops and venues and all types of stuff, just looking for somebody that would say yes to an event.
Just like literally going in and talking to the manager?
Just walking in and saying, hey, like, I want to do a live podcast here, focused on conversation of value. It's all focused on Austin culture. And, I really believed in the message. So I started walking in, and everybody was just terrified of, putting their brand and, a group setting. And thankfully I found one bar on West 6th Street, the Dogwood. And my friend Brad hooked me up with the event coordinator. And I went in and I just told him what I was trying to do. And they were like, well, it's different. We've never done that before. And there was like, how many people can you bring out? I was like, 100. I had no idea if I could get 100 people. But
you believed it.
I did. Yeah, I knew somebody would show up. They showed up to my boot camp. So I went home, made a flyer, made an Eventbrite link, and just started hitting up everybody I knew saying, hey, we're going to I hadn't released the episodes yet. We're going to do an episode 1 through 4 release party. So the episodes would drop and we'd throw a party, had live music, and then I did a live podcast with Eric Godsey. So as I was planning that event, I was looking at options to go over a house sound and run the podcast, and it just wasn't sitting right. I was like, looking at the event from an honest perspective, I was like, who the fuck would stop partying and listen to 2 guys talk about, trauma and, culture during a party? Like, there's going to be sidebars. There's going to be people ordering drinks. There's going to be doors swinging and banging. And it just wasn't sitting right. And then I went over and I did a workout at On It, and I just met this guy. His name was John Brown, and he's the owner of Austin Silent Disco. And immediately I was thinking, how could I incorporate those into a meditation or a workout? And then later in the day,
just real quick for the audience, if you haven't ever been to a silent disco, it's like wireless headphones.
Yeah.
Sometimes different channels. You could have 2 DJs and 2 color headphones and switch between, right? Just so that the listeners kind of get that vibe.
Yeah, and he heard I was doing events, so he actually approached me, but I hadn't connected the dots yet. And later in the day, he had given me his phone number, and I called him and I was like, hey man, I want to use them for something different. I was thinking, could I incorporate those in a podcast? If I'm running it out of a mixer and my H6 recorder, it just seemed like a easy, transmitter. So how can I utilize those in the podcast? And it just clicked that was the answer, because how do we listen to podcasts? How do we really tune in?
Yeah.
You throw on your headphones and your attention is isolated and, tapped in, and, nobody can reach you. You're just focused on the conversation. And so we rolled them out in that first event, and we sold 150 tickets to that event in 3 days, which was the fire marshal's capacity. And that conversation was incredible with Eric Godsey, and I fucked up. I made a promise during that podcast that I would give everybody in the room somewhere to go with conversation of value every week. I made that promise, and I had my work cut out for me, because I had the first party planned, and then going 2, 3, 4, 5, I just worked my way down 6th Street, just being introduced to GMs, and they were just like, okay, you can bring 100 people. Yeah, let's go. Nobody was coming out. 6th Street was dead. Wow. And so I claimed to have been the first event in Austin coming out of the pandemic. And then I attended an art gallery with a friend, and met Luis Angulo. He goes by the street artist name Oolong. And he owns a gallery on East Cesar Chavez. And so I interviewed him, and then we planned a live event over there. And then we just started bouncing around town. And as soon as we had the concept, venues were saying yes. And it was from bars to art galleries. And it was just a great way to network our way through that town. And then eventually it led me here to Native.
So I wanna go kind of back to the experience of walking into one of your live podcasts. It gives me the experience of like walking into a 3D movie or like a Universal Studios theme park where they're giving the audience, you know, these 3D glasses or something. Because, you know, you walk in, there's like a clean trash can full of these wireless silent disco headphones.
Yeah.
And immediately you get this sensation that like something's different here. Like I don't really know what's going to happen yet, but this is really interesting. There's like a whole stage and cool lights, and you're doing projection mapping, and then you get these headphones. And I think that is one of the most powerful things about podcasting is you're in your listener's ear. It's so intimate. And it's very fascinating to hear about how you were kind of struggling with how to give the live experience and the party experience, but not impede on the conversation. And this magical synchronistic moment happened for you at On It, where you met the silent disco gentleman. I forget what his name was.
Brown.
John Brown, and connected the dots. And then the other thing that really stands out to me is, you know, everyone has been online. Everyone's been networking online and doing Zoom call after Zoom call after Zoom call. And it's pretty extraordinary that you just decided to be grounded in the real world, or the, you know, this layer of the real world, and do this actual manual going to the bars and finding places that would host this, and then really building a community. And I think for podcasters, sometimes our audiences are disembodied listeners and we don't know who they are. And, you know, that can make us feel like, 100 downloads isn't even enough, right? But if you fill a room with 100 bodies, it's like impactful. There's a lot of change that can happen. There's a lot of amazing connections that can happen between the audience members themselves, between you and the audience. So, like, what do you think really gave you that impetus to invest in human to human connection, especially during such a intense time of like everyone's like trying to hide from each other and stay away?
Yeah, thank you. There was a lot in there, and so going back and kind of connecting the dots. So originally getting back on social media and presenting my message in a real way was super important to me, to open people's eyes to the fact that you could be real on social media. Not everything was fake, not everything's pretty. And to open those doors and open those conversations, it motivated me to continue asking questions and diving deeper and being on this, you know, this path of growth. For me, I like being a leader. I like putting myself in tough situations, so I have to step up. It makes me a better person. That's why I enjoyed being a coach. And then coming out of the pandemic, really, I wanted to draw people back. Even though we were utilizing platforms through tech and social media, there is a way to get back to real human interaction. So for me, being able to focus on a local podcast to where I have direct interaction with those that are following along is beautiful to me, to see people drawn out again, you know, especially coming out of the pandemic where, you know, people were hesitant to come back out and still are. And so to draw them out and them feel inspired and meet people and network and be able to share space where they were going out, they're having a good time, you could have a drink, you're listening to something of value or learning about something that's going on in your city. It was a great way for people to engage again with the community and meet each other eye to eye. So that's everything I do on social media, is really just to raise awareness back to reality, get people away from their devices, back to eye, shaking hands again, because we don't want to just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. I had, you know, a beautiful conversation with a spiritual mentor of mine, and it was a conversation where we were disagreeing about the fact of utilizing technology the way I do, you know, and he's like, man, it's all wrong. We need to go back to nature, because I was thinking more immersive. How can we utilize technology and innovate from the use of augmented reality being projected, you know, through the room, and you know, the use of the headphones, and you know, even though it's you know, a technological approach, what's transpiring is really human. People are feeling. And now with this room, this is the epitome of everything that I've learned through those events where, at Native I was doing it in the cafe, and you'd hear the espresso machine going off, and there's galleries upstairs, so doors would be opening and closing, and people would be in and out. And so now we have this space to where we can actually control the room, and everybody that buys a ticket to come in here is here to see the show. And what transpires after, they listen to us kind of open up about, someone's art or someone's passion or how they're serving the community of Austin. It's a very direct way to reinvigorate this city for people. And, that's my plan now is, with everything that's transpired, this entire podcast has been just under 6 months. Wow. That's when I introduced Eazy Does It. In 23 episodes, we're here now. And for me, it's the real end goal is just to show that this is a proof of concept. I want to teach people how to do this. I was just a regular dude, I still am. And I don't have any fancy degrees, or I'm not any subject matter expert in any one thing. But what I do have the ability to do is, see people for who they are and appreciate what they have to offer. And now I want to make a career out of showcasing them sharing their stories, but also show people that they can, bring people in a room, they can host parties, they can have conversations of value, they can engage again in real ways. And so everything that I preach to my team and my friends now, I'm sure they want me to shut up at times, but it's literally always on my mind about how we can get, people to be more real and share space in that capacity. So that's really our goal now, is to make it possible for much more than Eazy Does It.
I love that. I love the mission behind it, and making podcasting and networking and community, sharing that and sharing your process and blueprint. And I'm wondering if you could maybe peel back a little bit, because it may not be apparently obvious to those listening. How does one make all that work worth it financially? How, what is the underpinnings of your strategy with networking, and how does interviewing people evolve or turn into anything lucrative for all involved? What goes into that?
Yeah, I think what comes to mind immediately, our friend Daniel Duran, he's a muralist, and he did this piece that says community is currency. And there's so many ways of saying that. And so for us now, it's focusing on the relationships first. That's something I realized was special about Austin, growing up here and then coming back after 6.5 years, where I would check back in on my city once or twice a year, for less than 5 days. I didn't like sticking around much because I'd either want to stay or I'd just be like, well, I want to get back to my routine, because I was growing out there. Coming back and reintegrating into the city, nothing's changed in that capacity as far as people just want you to be real. They want to see how you treat people. The way I've been articulating it lately is we do have a lot of people that are moving here from New York. We do have a lot of people that are moving here from LA. And I think it's really important to distinguish the difference in the way that we, carry ourselves and do business here and treat each other. Because there's a lot of good people moving from everywhere, and they're coming here for a reason. But the way I've been putting it is, in New York, people want to shake your hands. They want to know who you are and what you can do for them. And that may be a friendly interaction. It may not mean you any harm, but they still want to know what you're going to do for them, right? You go to LA, you walk in the door, and if people don't know who you are, you already have an uphill battle. You already have a fight for people to like you or respect you. And here in Austin, man, we have a way of interacting where we don't give a fuck who you are. We might not even get your name. We just want to see how you interact and treat people, and how far I've gotten in a matter of months just from focusing in on the way I was raised, and just nodding or smiling or shaking someone's hand at a bar, or, listening to people when they say, hey, you need to meet so-and-so, and just being an open book as far as like, well, if they know me or they know what I'm about, like, they're not recommending that for no reason. So I look at relationships and people and their passions as breadcrumbs. And the more we open our eyes to what other people have to offer, the less, closed off, the less insecure, the less we have those blinders on, the more we see that this is an abundant world, and it would be, we'd be taking a lot for granted if we acted like it was any other way. Some people want to call it privilege, or, that they should be guilty or sorry for just the opportunities that they have. For me, I resonate with that. I had severe anxiety as a teenager and felt out of place because I realized that I could basically do whatever I wanted or pursue anything I wanted. And instead of pursuing those things that everybody expected me to, I wanted to serve something first. So as a naive 17-year-old, I started looking away from sports and looked towards the United States military and signed that contract, and boy, I was in for it for 6 years. Wow. Of the most structured environment that I was not built for, but I all along the way I believed that it was necessary for me to serve before I took advantage. And so now I try to think about life the same way, and think about, how am I serving the community, how am I serving my friends and family, and at times that those one's not as clear as the other. So we always have to check back in and ask ourselves if we're just being the best we can be, and think bigger than ourselves. So
you said so many wonderful things there. The community is currency. I hadn't heard that. I really love that.
Man,
it's a good one.
beautiful.
Also, I'd heard your network is your net worth. That's another good one, right? And it's like really this idea that it's not always what we can get as an individual. It's also like, what can my friend get, right? Like, if you win, I win, right? If we build that community of an environment, then everyone benefits from that. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why podcasting is so exciting, because it's like inherent in, if you're doing interview style, maybe true crime, it's a little different or something, but interview style podcasting is about creating dialogue between so many different kinds of members of your community, whether it's the global community or your local community.
Yeah.
And it's really powerful what starts to happen. Every conversation, it just kind of opens up this network of more possibilities for everyone involved. And especially in COVID times, I think that artists, creators, small businesses, everyone needs more of their story shared. Everyone needs more exposure, and what you're doing by having this platform is really, putting a microphone up to so many different kinds of people that that benefit from that. And so that's really a powerful thing. And you have this one phrase, own your space. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about like what that means for you.
Yeah, for me, man, like, I'm a stubborn motherfucker. Like, I got to remind myself of how to be a better human being every day. Like, that's why I have tattoos on my hands and arms, and I say the same mantras all the time. It's because those are reminders, often what my instincts aren't the best. And so I've learned to get away from instincts and trust in intuition, and my life has changed because of that. But, I think the interesting thing of focusing on, I've got a tattoo on my chest that says, don't just live, but live for a purpose bigger than yourself. Be an asset to your family, community, and country. And so just broadening your horizons of what your perspective is centered on beyond yourself puts a lot in perspective. Focusing on relationships and how you can help people, and, secondly, how they can help you is that's business. But, I think in our culture we have a big disconnect, and we focus too much on reciprocity. Often reciprocity is linear, where we think, okay, if I do this, I get this, right? And in Austin and the way I do business now, I don't think like that. I don't want a direct return. I like to act and then see how things circle back. I always try to think in loops. How am I closing loops? The more often something comes back to me, the more growth, the more success we have. And it might not always be clear, but you look back and you're like, oh, okay, Like that's why I did that, or that's, you know, why so and so was introduced into my life, or that's why we met. Like we're just closing loops all the time. And for me, you know, focusing on the opposite end of the spectrum, you know, serving something greater than yourself on the polar side is owning your space, right? This inward mindfulness of what is shifting internally, you know, being aware of your presence and energy. I'm an empath, but, you know, all the way through and through. I'm always in a receptive state. So for me to focus and own my space is really just a reflection, a feeling of what I'm taking in the world, and then project that outwardly. And the more I can tune into that, the better human being I am.
What was that like in the military, being receptive and empathic? That must have been an interesting one.
Yeah, that was not the environment. It was fucking tough. But I had a lot of time to kind of observe different leadership styles. I've learned the majority of my lessons in my life the hard way. And I almost prefer it that way, almost sadistically, where now I'm having to teach myself to just not, you know, like not everything has to be hard. Not everything has to be painful. Yeah. Exactly. There's a big reason I chose that name.
More mantras there for you to.
Yeah, man. But I had a lot of resistance in the military, and I had a lot of great friends and officers and leaders. And, you know, I love them as friends and human beings, and they'll do great things. But they're not the ones that stick out the most in my life. I've learned far more from bad leaders, just through observing and making notes on exactly what I wouldn't do. And, you know, I always say we have a tendency to forget. So just coming up with disciplines and practices and ways of reminding ourselves where we've been and where we're going, and being clear on the type of person we want to be, and doing everything in our power to stick to that. It's not the easy thing to do.
Totally.
We've got so much. We're exposed to so much now in the modern world that it's easy to shift and question yourself, and you know, think about, like, you know, think about imposter syndrome or something like that. Where
you could have been like, oh, it's COVID and no one is wanting me to have this live podcast in their place, and you could have given up there, and then you wouldn't have been here in your own podcast studio that looks amazing and luxurious, you know? Yeah,
that's the biggest thing I could tell anyone is, like, it's better to try and fail than, you know, not try at all. And for me, it's just like being in a state of continuous action, and the amount of times that I've fucked up or failed in my life and ended up on my ass, like, I realized it wasn't that bad. Like, I might have been heartbroken or, you know, questioned, you know, why I started or where I was going, but I almost always figured it out. And, you know, for me, failure in the bottom really wasn't that bad. And I consider myself fortunate for that, is that I have the tools. I have the awareness to realize, like, how much opportunity I still have. You know, thankfully I've got, you know, loved ones that support me, and good friends and community. And if you have that, community is currency. You're rich, man. So, I think by focusing on that, especially in Austin, like, you're going to win. The rest will fall into place.
Yeah. And, you know, speaking of the community piece, I would love to give a shout out. I think it's called like Community Foundation or Foundation Community. And I'll put this in the show notes. It is a model community here in Austin for those who have been unhoused, you know, aka the homeless. And they've actually found it isn't just housing. It isn't just helping people either get clean or, you know, harm prevention. It's community. Yeah. It's the breakdown of community that causes people to stay in these vicious homeless cycles. Yeah. And so it really is. You won't go hungry. You won't sleep, you know, somewhere you don't want to, if you have a thriving community. Yeah. And it seems like part of the military taught you leadership, you know, and it taught you how to mobilize this whole thing. Would you say that's true?
Yeah. I was waiting for my chance, you know, to, like, really step up and be the type of leader I wanted to be. The truth was that, you know, I joined the military chasing that. I thought, I joined to be a Navy SEAL at 18 years old and went through that training and paralyzed my leg, and that's a whole nother story for a different day. And I never got that chance to really be like the warrior that I sought out to as, a young man. After, being in those situations and observing leadership, I just realized that, there's a way to serve, and, make notes of how we can do that and, show up, lead with your heart, and the rest will fall into place. But I think we all have what it takes to be leaders in our own rights, but it's just trial and error for sure.
I've been really obsessed with this idea of the servant leader, and a good leader is someone who is tuned into the people that they're leading, and they're
Absolutely.
doing it out of service, right?
Yeah.
And hearing everyone. It also sounds like, you're hearing your community right now. You're interviewing a lot of people in the Austin area, and you're hearing what people are up to, and like you said, closing loops and connecting dots and connecting people and building this rich ecosystem. And I'm wondering, like, what's one or two really inspiring things that's come about for you as a result of starting this whole thing? Obviously you have this amazing studio, but I'm talking about like human to human inspiring things.
Man, yeah. Diving into the world of creatives and artists and musicians and just talking to them and hearing their stories and passions and celebrating their successes or booking them for gigs now with our live events. It's beautiful to share that. We're doing comedy and we're doing music and we're hosting podcasts, and it's like everybody in their own right is just trying to really express themselves. And I think the special thing about creatives and artists is that there is a certain amount of risk or resistance to pursuing that, especially as a full-time gig. And the amount of respect, unspoken respect, that I have for artists and creatives to take that chance and say, you know what, fuck it, like I'm not going to do what my parents want me to do, or what society wants me to do, and I'm going to do this, and it's going to be different, but that's what's going to make me stand out. That's incredibly inspiring to me. That's the reason that I sit in this chair today, is really just connecting with people on that level, of wanting to listen and hear that, so that I'm reminded myself to keep believing in my own true path, and keep pursuing that and being creative, and questioning the status quo and questioning expectation, because the reality is, like, the only way that we continue to progress on a societal level and bring people back away from these systems and control and fear, is through creative expression and love and light. And thankfully we can have a really good time doing that by celebrating those things and people. It's live music, it's art, it's it's listening to spoken word, it's simple, it's all expression. So that's the direction we're looking now, is just how do we celebrate those people on a street level. Thankfully a podcast, the podcasting platform is a great way of doing that. I think everybody should have a podcast.
Tell me more about that. Do you feel like this is going to stick around, this format? Where do you see podcasts going? And yeah, tell me, do you think that it is kind of something that, like, everyone has an Instagram?
Yeah.
Everyone should have a podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I heard a statistic. There was over 600,000 new podcasts last year alone. So my friend Sky King, he's a podcast producer, and he was saying that statistic to me, and at first glance it's like, well, that's a lot of podcasts, like how do you stick out? But I really don't give a shit about statistics. Like, I don't care like what the numbers are. If it's meant to be, you're gonna stick out. And so just being real, like, there are blueprints for how you can run a podcast. If you want to listen to your favorite podcast and ask the same questions and do the same shit, like, you can do that. Or you can look at platforms like we do look at social media and podcasting and, augmented reality and VR and all these things that are being introduced. And you say, okay, this is what's available. What's the opportunity here to use it differently, but focusing on, real human interaction and experiences that make people feel again. So, I think for us, it's all an experiential thing. Like, we want people to feel. And so, like, for this room, for example, having control of the room. Now with the Eazy Does It podcast, we keep who we're featuring on the podcast a secret, which is it's not an easy route to go. But the end goal for that is to open people's minds to perspectives that they wouldn't ordinarily seek out. Like I can put that I'm interviewing a musician on a flyer and get, 40 music lovers in this room that want to hear what his story is. But if someone is expecting a musician and they walk in and we're interviewing a chef and we're sharing that experience and, tasting the food and where we really create an immersive experience, then we get to open people's minds to people or to experiences that they wouldn't seek out, in their evenings or what makes them feel comfortable or safe. And I've been expressing to my team that, we're not going to hit the nail on the head every time. We're going to miss. We're going to be met with resistance. People are going to not like what we do. People are going to love what we do. But if anybody walks in this room and they're sitting and they're listening and they're feeling, whether it's positive or negative, we're doing something right. So it's a fine line, but it's a fun experience. And again, just looking forward to seeing how we can innovate. And because in a town like this, in a city like this, people are willing to collaborate, and we can, share ideas or give each other inspiration and avenues that we're not expecting.
It's one of the things that I think is really powerful about your platform is the amount of innovation across the board. Like you've tried so many different new things that have turned this into what it
Scary,
is, right?
Dude.
Yeah, it sounds scary. I mean, there's a risk associated with that, right?
Yeah.
Anytime you try something new,
A lot
but
of sweat.
no reward if
Yeah.
you don't risk it, right? And it
Yeah.
seems like it's been a really powerful end goal so far, but what has been something really challenging?
Man, I mean, just like diving into tech and podcasting, and I don't have any experience doing any of this, and creating a business model off of it. Like I just went straight from high school. I was a plumber for a year, digging ditches and doing undergrounds, and then joined the military to be a warrior, and got lost along that way, and now I'm here way in over my head and figuring it out because I know that there's value in it. And the amount of like restless nights and just times I've been at my end of like what's next, is it's taken a lot of faith and just believing that there's something greater, but feeling that draw and believing for me has paid off. Taking those risks, I was full-time personal trainer over at On It Gym until July, and thankfully, with the podcasting platform, there's no compete in me building a separate business. So right. I would go open the gym most days at 6 a.m. and I'd coach a class till 7:30. I would train clients from 8, 9, 10. Then I'd go have a couple coffee or lunch meetings for my podcast or whatever's going on. Sometimes I'd do midday podcast where I'd film in Cosmic Coffee's parking lot. Instead of being a business meeting, we just hop in the van with coffee and hit record, and then awesome. I'd whip back over to the gym and I'd work out from 1:30 to 4 p.m. and then I'd make smoothies from 4 to 6, and I'd get off, and then I would sit or take care of myself or plan what was next as far as my own business.
So you're saying that it was like nonstop, full days, lots of unknowns.
Yeah, it was like 5:30 a.m. to 10 p.m. every night of just kind of like working at the gym where that was, what I was living off of and my income, and then, but planning that next step of the podcast or, editing episodes, whatever it was my nighttime gig.
You were doing the editing and everything.
Yeah. And so I did that for about 8-9 months straight, and it wasn't healthy. I was splitting myself up between 2 careers, and I was training 6 days a week like I was going to be a fucking Olympian, and I was just exhausted, man. I was constantly getting sick. I wasn't my best self, I'd put on a face to come in and train, and I wasn't really feeling great, I was just smoked. And So I realized that it wasn't sustainable. My health was declining, but I knew what the right move was, and it was I needed to build my own business. I needed to believe that it would work, and so I said fuck it, and I gave them a 30-day notice at the gym, and I'd even have this room wasn't even a part of the conversation when I made that decision, and I guess like 8 days after I left my job, kind of transitioning to going full-time podcasting, was July 8th, and that was when I had the conversation about this room, and then I realized the potential for it to actually be a business. And so now that's the model. Is we are doing these live events. We're going to be hosting podcasts, we're going to be hosting comedy, live music, everything out of this room, but those are all evening time events. Now for us is opening this space and these microphones up to creatives and artists and leaders and podcasters alike. Now they can come in and utilize our space and develop a community here, where we take that process of learning everything the hard way, and we're just here to hit some buttons and facilitate conversations.
There you go. So if you are in Austin, Texas at any point, this is the place to come and record. They have audio, video. It's an amazing space, fantastic team. And yeah, so definitely worth coming over to Native Hostel. So one of the things that we're getting kind of close to the end of the interview, but one of the things that I really want to give the listeners is more understanding of how you make this work. So just to be clear, there's ticket sales to the events, right? So that's one source of income.
Yeah.
But now this space, it's like a studio. You rent it out hourly by the day. And is there any other way that you have found to monetize your platform besides those two routes?
Yeah. It's obviously any business takes money to run and to grow and scale, and that's what's kept this business from really expanding or scaling. Is just like, I mean, I started my business, I started my podcast with a credit card and, faith that it would pay off, and still paying for that. But, just diving in and figuring it out, and like the value is in the people and conversations. But for me, like it doesn't take much to start your platform. You can get basic gear. You can buy a kit off Amazon today, for less than $200 to start articulating your message, start speaking. Annoy people at dinner parties, annoy people at the bar, annoy your family members, your friends, everyone. Just start trying to articulate who you are and what you want to do in the world. And the amount of times that I have trouble shutting the fuck up about it, but I'm always just trying to, refine my message and find clarity in my own head of what it is I'm trying to do. And public speaking and podcasting is a great way to do that. Yeah. And so, for us as a business, it started out, I would go into a venue once I figured out what a pitch deck was, and learned how to make one. I just walk into
What is a pitch deck for anyone listening?
Pitch deck is basically just like a group of slides. It's like a slideshow that's presentable to, showcase who you are, what you're trying to do, what the return is for businesses or sponsors. And so it's just a presentation. And so I would go into bars or venues that I asked for the event coordinator, GM, and I would say, hey, I want to do a live podcast here. I'm selling tickets, so if I could take tickets, then y'all take the bar and I'll bring you 100 people. And some venues will do a bar split there. And then as well as sponsorships. Mm-hmm. So those are the ways that I was kind of funding the growth. It was tough, because I would make, $500 to $1,000 off of, an event where I'd set up and I didn't have a crew, it was just me and my camera guy at the time. And we'd go in, we'd set up and throw a party, and then I'd pay out musicians, and I'd have, $200 left if I was lucky. And that's what I would use to make more flyers or make that next move or buy a nicer microphone or whatever it was. So, it was like, I was strangled by funds for a long time. But I learned a lot in that process, as far as like learning how to, accept help and look to people for, assistance in that aspect, through sponsorships and everything. But at the end of the day now, like through all of that, I realized that sponsorships weren't the way that I wanted to fund this platform.
Tell me why.
For me, it's tough to talk about something that you believe, and that resonates with the crowd or your listeners, and then turn around and sell them a pillow. Like it's just, it doesn't make sense for me to try to sell something off of something that I admire as being genuine, and really focusing on how I create a certain frequency and vibe and openness in the room. And the second I would turn around and say presented by, or check out such and such, like I said, I'm an empath, and I could feel a shift, and that would tear my heart out, because I'm like, fuck, now I'm not really standing for who I am and or what I'm shooting for.
And also, like, you're breaking trust in a way.
Yeah, it just didn't feel like real.
And I mean, this is why I tell a lot of people that I help start podcasts, like, don't try and go into this to get sponsors, because in my opinion, it's like you're in debt. It's like just you're in debt to this. And it may be a great sponsor, and there, by no means this is not a blanket statement. There's shows that could benefit from a sponsorship. There's ways you can do it. I think Joe Rogan, honestly, because he's so big, he's like, hey, you can sponsor me. I'm going to do whatever I want. Yeah. But for the most part, I think that it does dilute the integrity. So that's
there's a way to do it. I just haven't figured it out yet.
You have these really cool chairs. I got to say that I do want to buy one. Maybe that wasn't an exact sponsorship. Maybe that was more like just a collaboration.
No, it was, man. Sleek Forum sponsored me a while back. But again, it's just like keeping your eyes open and meeting good people, man. Like, just, that wasn't, they didn't pursue me to sponsor me. I was introduced through, a mutual friend, and we just met as friends first, and then we started having discussions later as we realized that there's overlap there. But again, like, if it's a route that you don't have to go, like, don't, like, now I realize that there are angel investors, there's venture capitalists out there, there are people that there's probably people in your family or your friends that would support you, if you do, believe in what you're doing, and you can articulate your message clearly, and can figure out how there's going to be return down the road. There's a way to do it where you can do it with people that are probably already in your life. So just focusing on being genuine and real, and putting yourself your message first, refining that craft, and like the pieces will fall into place. Like, money is one of the things I've stressed out about the most, and it always works out. It's like, it's almost not worth stressing about,
Would it work out if you didn't stress about it, though? That's the question.
Yeah, I like to think so, and it usually does. And so I'm trying to focus more on that. But thankfully, getting a podcast up, you can do it with minimal equipment. You can do it with a subscription on Podbean or Captivate or whatever you want to use, to where you can get it up and out, and just start focusing on, like I said, speaking clearly, articulating what you want to say, and there will be a trickle effect down the road, and get help along the way.
What other elements do you think, if someone is listening to this and they're like, this is what I needed to feel like I want to start my podcast, what are a few other things that you think should be kind of center of mind as someone starting their platform?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I see is people, they want to stockpile episodes, and I did the same thing. I said, all right, I'm gonna record episode 1 through 4, and I'm gonna release those. But that was more of a calculated move based off of saying I wanted people to be able to listen to episode 1, get the backstory of why I started, and then if they're interested, immediately go to 2, 3, 4 and see what the actual platform was. So that was calculated. But the biggest thing I hear from people is like, I want to start a podcast, and they just stick to that forever. They're just like, I'm going to, or I want to, and they don't take that initial step. Or they start recording episodes and they listen back to it and it's fucking terrible, and so they never release it. Like, if I went back and listened to Raw Perception Project years ago, I'd just be like, what was I doing? You know, like, it's terrible. And I mean, I've still have no idea what I'm doing. But there's something to be said for that, as far as, like, you do get better with practice. You do get better with time. And your growth and skills and believing in yourself is going to compound much faster by releasing it and learning the hard way, or
Absolutely.
just getting used to just putting less than ideal shit out there. And I'm not saying you should half-ass anything. Like, do your best. But if your best is still not meeting the mark of where you want to be, you'll get there through action. So the best advice I got was record a commercial or an intro for your podcast and keep it under a minute, and just say, hey, I'm Evan Duvall. I'm going to be releasing a podcast on this date. Cut. Like, keep it really simple. Put that out on the platform and hit up everybody that you know. I sent out 300 text messages and emails saying, hey, I just did this intro. Please go rate and review it. And this was some advice from somebody in the industry that I got. And so I was able to get like over 100 reviews, and it wasn't even a real podcast episode. And so what that does is, when you actually release your first episode, it looks like you're much farther along through reviews, and you switch through the algorithm a lot faster as far as a relevant podcast. So
Right.
if you get a good push from your first 10 or 20 episodes, you actually have a chance to like hit some charts, and people find you that wouldn't ordinarily find you if you just had 0 reviews. So
Totally.
just put something out there and then just start releasing episode. Like, I mean, you listen to any podcaster, any businessman, any author, they're going to talk about what the quality of their original work was. And listen to Joe Rogan and just hear, what episode is he on? Fucking 1,500?
So many.
Something like that, man. And like, the difference between 1 through 10 and 1,500 that's the reason he's getting $190 million.
You got to get through those original crappy episodes, so you may as well start sooner rather than later, so you can get through them.
I learned something every time. Like, I walk away from every podcast like, I could have done that better. And I'm never hard on myself about it. I'm not like, oh, shitty. Like, no,
you're easy on yourself.
It's all good. Like, like, you're going to get better. Put it out there. And I'm still on episode 23, So like, my goal is to be episode 100 by springtime. Like, I'm about to turn it on, just to get better, just to refine that craft. And we've got the model built now. We've got the equipment, and I'm done stressing about how to kind of do everything now. It's just time to do it and get better.
Really powerful messages, and important ones for everyone to take to heart, because we can waste our life in planning and preparation and not actually deliver the gifts, right, that we have. And I'm curious, as we wind up, like, is there any podcasts that have been massively influential for you?
Oh man, I love jumping around. I've pulled a lot of inspiration from a lot of podcasts, and for me, set and setting is super important. I've gotten a lot of inspiration from, formats like Tiny Desk, or just different podcasts where there's video, there's intimate connection. So I don't want to be cliche and just say Joe Rogan, but man, I've hopped around all over, from Andrew Huberman, and I like to pursue Joe Rogan's guests and see what their platforms are. But I honestly don't listen to a lot of podcasts. I'll turn on Rich Roll. I really like his style. He's been doing it a while. A lot of stuff coming off of NPR. But Rich Roll he's a badass dude. I love the idea of kind of being an athlete, and also having the capacity to sit and listen and have conversations, and seeing the way he did it and made it a career. I got a lot of inspiration from that. I hope to kind of go down the same path as far as just being an athlete and keeping my health up to par, and Even though we're in the event and party space now, there's a way to do it all. It's
Absolutely.
just finding balance.
Yeah, all things in balance. What about books that have been influential for you?
Books. I was drawn mostly to a lot of like different religious texts, just for like building my own capacity of thinking mindfully and not being so dogmatic in my own approach of living in the Western world and being so like black and white or like I said, dogmatic on right and wrong. So a lot of Buddhist teachings. The Tao is the one that I've learned the most from and go back to the most. But just opening my mind as far as nonfiction is something that I have a lot of resistance to. I would always recommend The Fifth Sacred Thing. That's a beautiful book. For me, like I like to find things that I have a lot of resistance to and sit there and read. But just turning pages and focusing on text, it's such a different way of utilizing your brain, and it's a practice skill, and it's something you'll lose if you don't use it. And 2 to 3 minutes of picking up a book for me can reset my whole day. I always try to keep them close by and
some good ones,
remind myself of where I've been as far as like the lessons we take on. I think journaling is a great way to do that if you mix those two, like reading and journaling, where you try to articulate your own message from what you're reading. Too many people read something today and then they just spit it out verbatim, and there's a difference, there's a weight to it. When I go to a dinner party and I just hear someone quoting something that I've read, or like I know what they're getting at, and they're just saying it like it's original, it's like it just rubs me the wrong way. And so I look for people that they can hear something and they're not attached to it, and they really try to be original. Those are the people I'm looking for in the world. And wherever you're getting your knowledge from, just seek it. For sure, it's everywhere.
Yeah, man, so true. And thanks for those recommendations. It's always interesting to see what podcasts and books have influenced people and kind of piece it together.
I used to release like lists of podcasts and books and stuff. I need to get back to that. That was a great way.
It's helpful for people, right? To kind of follow a line of thought. And also the journaling tip is huge. I almost find myself avoiding writing because I know how much it moves shit forward. Yeah. Like it's like if I don't want my life to go to,
I'm the same way.
100 miles an hour, it's like don't write it down.
I have such a bad habit of being like, oh, if I'm not writing my best material, like if I'm not writing philosophy, or you see how I write captions on
your captions are
social
awesome.
media, and like if I'm not writing at my best, then like I don't write at all. And so I'm trying to break that pattern.
Write some crappy pages.
Yeah, the amount of books that I've sat down to write and like are half finished is insane, because when I sit down to write a book, I'm like, I'm gonna write a book, and then like, where's that at? Teaching myself now to like just write. I sat with a friend and she was talking about how when she journals about her environment, about her surroundings. So she'll go to a coffee shop and just write, like about what color the walls are, or what a certain man looks like sitting across from her. And that was so beautifully inspiring to me, because it was such a different approach than what how I think about writing. I think about writing as trying to find clarity with my thoughts, and very rigid in that approach as far as what the product is. So, letting yourself flow. And I would make a recommendation for any creative artist or business owner, anybody, to read The War of Art. That book changed a lot in my life as far as just finding your flow, and your flow is usually the resistance. And where you feel resistance, lean in, and the product will be beautiful. And it's not the easy route.
I love that book. I love that point. It is so true. If we push into the resistance, it's like on the other side of that, there's so much momentum.
It's the fastest path.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's hard, but and have compassion for yourself along that. Like it's it's not healthy just to lean only into resistance. But you do have to find your true path, and it's a dance daily to stay on that. But once you become aware of where the resistance and where the flow is, then it becomes less severe. You don't have these giant swings. And it's a daily dance of awareness. And sometimes we get off and we know it because of that attunement, that a practice skill of feeling that flow, feeling that resistance. And if you feel like you're walking a tightrope, you're on. Keep walking it.
Yeah.
For sure.
Especially when it comes to putting your voice out there, your message. It's a vulnerable thing. The imposter syndrome voice comes in, and it's like usually when we're feeling fear or doubt, it's like a perfect signal that we just got to keep going. It's the right way. It's keep going.
Yep. It's just as easy as it is hard.
Yeah, so. Man. Well, Evan, it's been amazing getting to hear about this journey of the Eazy Does It podcast and Eazy's listening room. And thank you again for making time.
Yeah.
And how can the listeners tune into you? What's the best place for them to do so and connect with you?
Yeah, man. I share everything through my own personal Instagram. It's Eazy Does It, EAZY.does it. And then the studio you can follow. It's at Eazy Studio, EAZYS.studio. That's where we'll be sharing a lot more educational content of what we're doing here in this studio. I mean, I just got the keys to this place July 10th or July 8th, the day before my birthday, and now we're here. We're putting on events. And
it's a good present.
We've got the space open now for creatives and podcasters to come record here. It's going to be a fun experience to develop that community, and our goal is really to educate people on how to pursue the live format, get people engaged off of these devices, focus on the relationships and network, and we've got an amazing team that can help us out there.
Yeah, let's give these wonderful gentlemen a shout out. Would you remind me of each of their names?
Yeah, we've got Drew Taylor. He's handling the media and creative direction of the platform. Nice. We've got Patrick Peterson, and then our other project manager is Madeline Worrell, and she is bringing so much to the table. Everyone is, as far as bringing clarity to how we're clarifying what we're doing here in this city and sharing this space. So.
You're making big splashes, big waves, and it's so cool to just see this kind of beautiful blossoming of community space open up in our city, especially in a time when it's so needed. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thanks, man. Yeah, that was super fun to be on the opposite side.
Yeah, man. I love interviewing podcasters for that very reason. It's cool to give that experience. And yes, I encourage you, dear listeners, go check out the Eazy Does It podcast. Check out some of the wonderful guests that Evan has interviewed. Check out this beautiful space. If you're listening, go check this video version out on our YouTube channel, because you're going to want to see how awesome this place is. And I'll catch you on the next episode.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.